Hello, CJ. You ready? Here we go. Hello everyone, welcome back to Hobbies with Jose. Great to have you here. And today we are starting our brand new project. We're finally going to customize our Studio Series Cliffjumper. Now, as we've done with previous projects, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what modifications we're going to make to this build. Now, a lot of the issues that I have with this mold I've laid out in my review, which hopefully you've had a chance to check out. But one of the simple things I'm going to do, of course, is get rid of the backpack, this entire section that folds out. And I was even thinking about leaving out this back plate, but I think I'm going to end up keeping it because it doesn't add a whole lot to the back itself, and I like the shape of it, so I think I'm going to leave that. And the way that the head sits so much forward onto the neck, I always thought looked weird, but I know it's due to the transformation that they did that. I want to try and see if I can try to place it more firmly onto the neck. I think if I do that, though, I'm going to lose the ability for him to look up, which I think is going to be an okay sacrifice to do, but that's something I'm going to look into. And I mentioned in my review that he has this hinge section on his crotch that was used for a piece for Jeep Bumblebee, which this Cliffjumper isn't using, so there's nothing there. I'm just going to go ahead and cut off those two little pieces there. But the biggest issue, of course, is the feet. They're pretty much a mess. And I think what I'm going to do to start is cut off all the excess bits that's on the back of the foot here that has pretty much the front of the vehicle. And for this side section here, I want to try and push this piece as close to the leg as possible. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to get rid of this clear piece in the middle, cut off all the extra bits here, and just try to glue it on there as much as I can, just so it's nice and flush. Even though this piece here is molded as a side of the vehicle and not the leg, it's hopefully going to look a little bit better just being as close to the leg as possible. And of course for the back, I'm going to cut off these extra plastic bits here on the top, just so they're not in the way so much. And I think the last piece of modification I'm going to do is this plastic section underneath the wheels. I think I'm just going to cut the whole thing off just so it looks a little bit more cleaner when we're looking at it from the front. But I think that's pretty much it for the modifications that I'm going to make on him. So let's go ahead and grab some tools and start disassembling him. And once again, I've got the tools of the trade here. We've got a decently sized little piece of wood, a hammer, a screwdriver, and an old towel. This will help prevent scratches and dings to go into the body. And of course a pin punch set, which will more than likely just use a small one. And we're going to start with some of the easier sections to take apart, like the ball joint section. So let's go ahead and yank those out. The arms have the wider pin in them, so I'm going to leave them as is. Another ball joint in here. And here on this plastic piece, we have our first little pin that we're going to punch out. One more tool, needle nose pliers. another pin in here, but there's no exit point on the other side, and I don't want to cut any of this part off. So I'm going to leave this one on. Now, even though I won't be using this piece, I'm still going to go ahead and remove the 2 pins in the back. Let's see what else we have. I'm seeing a couple of the wide pins, so some hinges are going to have to stay in place. There's this little one right in here. Sometimes just getting it in a stable position can be challenging enough. Oh, I found another piece I can take off. There we go. That's a little one. And it looks like there's an even smaller one inside here, but the front chest piece really gets in the way of me trying to punch a hole in it, and I don't want to damage that part. So I think I'm going to leave this whole piece as is. 2 more pins in the bottom. And they've got their holes up on top, but if I punch through this section here, it's going to make a hole in the top. So this is kind of a delicate piece, which is going to be tough to take apart. No issues in keeping it all together though. And it looks like I've got 2 more pins right up on top here. There is one last tiny pin here. There we go. And everything else has the white pin, so we're going to leave this piece as is. And finally, there's 1 pin left for his neck, so I'm going to take that one off. And it's going through a tiny bit. Ooh, this is really tricky to keep it stable because of his round head. Yeah, that was bound to happen. All right. Good as new. Woo! Success! That took a minute. And I only had to sacrifice one of my tools. Another useful tool. So we now have Cliffjumper disassembled for the most part. Next what we're going to do is strip the paint, and I still have my concoction from last project. What I'm using once again is 91% isopropyl alcohol and lacquer thinner. Now this is a strong stuff, so you want to use about 9 parts alcohol, 1 part thinner. I'm going to let them sit here for a couple of hours and then we'll check back on them and see how they're doing. So at this point we've gotten the paint stripped off of all of the pieces here. An interesting thing to note about this mold that I didn't realize before are the wheels and what color they're molded in. We've got a red one here, a red one, red one. This one's black. I'm not exactly sure why they did that. I didn't notice it on the figure at first that these wheels were painted black and these had the red sections painted red. And I'm interested to know if the other Studio Series Cliffjumpers are molded the same way. So let me know in the comments below if you notice that. Also, a couple of the clear pieces did snap off, like this section here. I think my stripping solution might be a tad strong, but I only had it in there for about an hour or so, so that tends to happen with the clear pieces. Thankfully though, the clear pieces that I'm actually keeping are intact. But let's go ahead and get started with some modifications. I'm going to start with something easy and get rid of this back kibble section. And next I'll just file this down and get this nice and smooth. Next up, I'll remove the rest of the clear piece that didn't break away in the stripping process. Getting this little piece off is going to be tricky. Thankfully, most of it came off the other leg. So next, I'm going to cut off all the bits here in the middle that were supposed to connect the figure, but that way without them, I'll be able to eventually glue it in there as close as possible. I think that looks better already. So here's the leg kind of put together. I think overall it looks good. Next up, I'm going to trim the bottom parts of this section here, just so it's not so bulky when viewing him from the front. And he's got these little pegs in his arms for transformation, so those are going to come off as well. And last but not least, we're going to remove the entire chunk of cable he's got on the back of his feet. This is going to be tricky, but I'm going to try to smooth things out as much as I can here. All right, let me sand these parts down and see what we've got here. I got a good chunk off the back. Still has some cable on the side, but there's really nothing else underneath it to cut away from, so kind of left this part as is, but I think that's going to look pretty decent. We'll get a much better idea once I put some primer on it. That should pretty much do it for modifications. Now we'll go ahead and mount them onto alligator clips and get them ready for paint. I do want to protect the ball joints from getting paint on them and causing the joints from getting overly stiff, so I'm going to go ahead and mask them up. Hey, and while we're at it, forgot one modification here. I need to cut these pieces off. Oh, there's always something I forget. So we've got all of our pieces mounted and ready for primer, which is going to be next week. That's where I'm going to end it for today. Thank you all for joining me at the start of this journey, and I hope you come back next week. Take care, everybody.